as the covenant strength of Tesco.
Is it a period of 12 months minimum, like that strength spread over 12 months, or?
Well, I mean, all you can do when you're assessing covenant strength is look historically, because Tesco don't produce P&L statements for 24 months in advance because they don't know how much bread they're going to sell. So you can only look historically, and you say, right, okay, well, Tesco are a FTSE 100 company. They'd made this many millions in turnover and this much profit, blah blah blah. And you probably just have to assume that Mr. and Mrs. Smith, are living sort of effectively as a job. So yeah, when you're assessing covenant strength, you can do a load of other. You can go on Experian, or you can do a Dun & Bradstreet report if you want, or if you're an accountant, you can do a deep dive into their. If they're a FTSE company, you can do a deep dive into their company accounts, which has its own little problems because everyone knows Starbucks doesn't make any profit and yet continues to open stores for charitable purposes, presumably. So doing deep dive on company accounts does come with its own sort of cautionary notes as well. So the lower the risk, the lower the yield, because that's what we're willing to accept. We're willing, as Nisha and Mark have demonstrated, we're willing to accept a lower yield for the lower risk. I'm more certain to receive my income, and therefore I'm willing to trade that off and accept that I'm not going to get quite as much bang for my buck. If I'm going to do an HMO or some serviced accommodation, where everyone knows now people are selling serviced accommodation units left, right, and centre because they're not getting 70% booking rates and all that kind of jazz. Surprise. Then you're going to want more income for that uncertainty. Whereas I can trade that off. I can go even further if I want. I can buy some UK government bonds for 2%. Yeah, and they are they're nailed on. You're never going to get a leaky roof with a government bond, but I'm only going to get 2% return. So you can go on that sort of on that spectrum, all the way up and down. So a little bit of a handy ready reckoner. So again, some other training companies do this.
We had that slide before.
Yeah.
Just before.
Right. If you see a property or analysing a property with a 6% yield, or if it says 6% yield, what you can do as a basic form of mathematics is say, right, well, £10,000 per annum in rent, or whatever the rent happens to be, multiplied by 16.66. Yeah, and that's called the year's purchase, the YP. It's top and bottom of it's the rent multiple. Sorry, let me just get rid of this. Otherwise it'll bug me. Again, going all the way down to a 12% yield, or up if you will, you only multiply the rent by 8.3. Yeah? So if you've still got your same temp, so the next slide will sort of hopefully bring this home a little bit clearer.
It's just an inverse relation.
Yes, absolutely. It's the exact opposite. Yeah, it's kind of like a seesaw. That's how I was taught it. The lower the yield, the higher the rent multiplier.
So if I'm right, this is capitalisation rates, isn't it? Because you said there's no reference to debt. It is just the cash.
Without you're obviously a financier or a banker or an accountant. Yeah, it is the capitalisation rates. So if you want to use yields, I'll show you on the next slide. But you just divide the rent by X%. So it's £10,000 divided by 7% on your calculator. So just do the number pressing equals, and that'll produce the same figure as if you were to say £10,000 multiplied by 14.28. It will be the same answer on both calculations. But sometimes people, just the way that people's brain works, the multiplication version just sits better. Okay, that's the reason I put that up, because just sometimes it helps people in the room. So capitalisation, yield calculations. So we're going to start with the 10% rent. Okay, these have come out very strange. The layout's just a bit awkward. Okay. So if you just excuse the formatting, because it's sort of a little bit different on the actual slideshow. But the very easy one to sort of start us off with, and again what I was talking about earlier in terms of the percent, the adding or deducting 1% on the yield and what difference it makes. This will hopefully be a nice visual representation of that. Got £10,000 at 10%, 100 grand. So this is your rental income on your prospective property. And if you have a 10% yield, if you press divide by 10%, your GDV, if you will, is 100 grand. Nice and easy, yeah? Right. Oh, we're now going to go down to an 8% yield. So we've found an alternative investment that's a bit more secure. You've still got an 8%, you've still got £10,000 on your rent, but you think, or the market thinks at least, because of the comparables you've found, that the property should be capitalised at 8%. So you press on your calculator, £10,000 divided by 8% equals 125 grand. So a 2% swing downwards in yield has resulted in the capital value, the end valuation of your property being 25 grand to the upside. Okay. However, let's go the other way. Now the valuer's had a really bad morning, argument with his wife, and you've not.
He's went with him, they down value.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, no, he's not downvalued it. That's a massive misinterpretation of the facts. There's just no evidence to substantiate. That's the big thing. There must be evidence. If there's no evidence, then you might end up with this horrendous figure. If the evidence is there and it all stacks up, it's a walk in the park, trust me. I love it when people give me valuation packs and they say, oh, well, you know, there you go, there's this piece, this evidence, this evidence, this evidence, this evidence, blah, blah, blah. Go off and do your worst. Because it's all there and it's absolute. There's no crossing fingers, there's no, you know, sort of if buts or maybes. So again, you divide it by 12.25%. That's 80 grand to me.
How do we know what is yield in that area? Because 8 can be very different to 12. How
Comparables.
do you determine that yield?
The comparables. We do not determine the yield. The market does, the comparable evidence. So what we do as valuers, we will say, right, I can look at the property next door, for example. Again, let's say you've got 2 shops. Yeah, I'm valuing your shop. Next door sold 6 months ago. And it sold for £130,000 and it was producing £13,000. So that's a 10% yield. And then I can look at the property next door to that. And without screwing myself over on numbers, that sold for 9.5% yield. And then the property a few doors down from that sold for 10.7%. Because they will never all line up absolutely at 10%. That just doesn't happen in real life. But what you've got then is a range. You've got
based on the people in those properties.
Based on the whoever's bought it.
But based on the quality of the tenants.
Yeah.
Or the aggregate of.
You don't. No, it's a good